this is, this is from Hitchens here. I'm not doing a scholarly address about Orwell. Now, at the end of chapter 1, the crude yet subtle relationship between the dominator and the dominated. We don't need any of the rest of that sentence, but just to say that he was on the subject of power, cruelty, force. Now, the crude yet subtle relationship between the dominator and the dominated reminds me of Thomas Jefferson's idea that the having slaves was as corrupting to the slaveholder as to the slaves. It corrupted the slaves. It made them servile and so on, but it made the slaveholder corrupted the slaveholder in certain ways as well. Now he says, Orwell can be read as one of the founders of the discipline of post-colonialism. Right. After colonialism leaves, you can all get back to your cultures. Great idea. As well as one of the literary registers of the historic transition of Britain from an imperial monochrome society. Imperial, so it has a huge empire and it's monochrome, one color, right? Everybody speaks British, even in the far-flung countries. Making a transition from that society to a multicultural, multi-ethnic one. Multicultural, multi-ethnic society. This was published in 2002. Haven't we learned our lesson by 2002, Mr. Hitchens? That multicultural and multi-ethnic is not a value in and of itself? Only freedom and rights are values in and of themselves. Now, you have as many ethnic cultures. I'm sitting in the middle of New York City, Central Park. There are more ethnicities on the island I'm on than in any other region on the planet. And we've got a far lower crime rate than Amsterdam or Stockholm or Paris. So we're into chapter 2 now. Now, I don't know what you think of Salman Rushdie because he received death threats, but he says this is Salman Rushdie being quoted by Hitchens. The Orwell of Inside the Whale, this essay that Orwell wrote, and 1984, his book, that Orwell is advocating ideas that can only be of service to our masters. Rushdie actually said that. I don't know anything about Rushdie, but I like him less the more I find out. I identified with the guy because his life was threatened by the Muslim fanatic idiots, but I guess the reason that they threatened his life was because he had left Islam. And they said, if you come back, we'll take away the death threat. So he reconverted back to Islam. Can you believe that? And they didn't rescind the death threat. So that tell you a little more about Rushdie there, I guess, wouldn't it? Skipping down a ways, he mentions James Burnham, an intellectual father of the Cold War. You might want to check that out on your own. He says it's in his next chapter, which I'm not to yet. Intellectual father of the Cold War. Skipping a few pages further. Now, he talks about this guy who keeps making fun of Orwell, picking on Orwell. And the guy kind of resents Orwell, you can tell, and he says, because what Williams means to imply, but is not brave enough to say, is that Orwell invented the picture of totalitarianism, or totalitarian collectivism. He invented the picture of it, right? So no matter where you go and how you try to talk about totalitarianism and collectivism, you have to talk about Orwell. He's going to be involved in the conversation. There's no way around it. Now, he also says down here, the flat sentence, the humanitarian is always a hypocrite, may contain a particle of truth. Well, that's an interesting sentence. The humanitarian is always a hypocrite. How would that contain a particle of truth? I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen. I was able to twist over backwards and come up with some things as I was making these notes last night. Some thoughts on it, but not profound enough that I was able to remember the rationalization. Now, the Polish poet and essayist Czesław Miłosz wrote in 1953, he wrote this essay, The Captive Mind. It was written in 51 and 52, published in 53. He says some stuff, we're not worried about it, but he says, such a form of writing is forbidden by the new faith. The New Faith, 1951 and 52 he wrote that. The New Faith, he calls it. Marxism and what had taken over his country, Poland, and the Red Terror and stuff, that was the New Faith, he calls it. They've done away with the old faith, and this is a new one. He didn't think it was scientific by any stretch. I'll just put that in there for those of you who think that Stalin and Soviet Russia were secular, atheistic. Forget it. They were as religious as anything else. Now, this guy was in Poland writing about Poland, and he had read George Orwell's 1984 this early. It was published in 51, and he had read it and written this by the end of 52. So how is that behind the Iron Curtain in Poland? Well, here's what Hitchens has to say about that. Only 1 or 2 years after Orwell's death, in other words, his book about a secret book circulated only within the inner party was itself a secret book circulated only within the inner party. His book came true within a matter of a couple dozen months of being published. His book came true. Here we are 60 years later, and there are still as many Orwellian states around the world as you care to name. And they're getting, in the guise of Islam, they're getting more menacing. Now, Louis Pasteur, who I'm sure you'll recognize, invented pasteurization, says, quote, this is not in quote marks, but Hitchens quotes him as saying, "Coincidence has a tendency to occur only to the mind that is prepared to notice it." That's a very profound remark, I think, because take for example Benjamin Franklin, who noticed that there was a coincidence between lightning and static electricity. But he was only prepared to notice this because he had studied lightning so, and he'd studied electricity so, and static. And most people wouldn't see the coincidence. But he did. I'm able to see coincidences somewhere, like, for example, the coincidence of religion with environmentalism, which I have seen, actually, and heard now, has been mentioned several times by other people. I heard Leonard Peikoff mention in a podcast I was listening to a couple weeks ago. He mentioned that environmentalism is just a new religion with the new God as nature and stuff. I never heard him say it before. I heard a guy who started the Weather Channel talking about how it's just like a religion. Lots of people are on that track, and I had never heard that. I actually did a video called "It's the New Religion," Environmentalism the New Religion, posted it, and saw over in the related sidebar all these videos about that. So interesting that if your mind is prepared to notice it, then you can see these coincidences, but not if not. And then Hitchens shows how much he is a Platonist, meaning that he thinks that ideas are divorced from reality. He follows up Louis Pasteur's quote, "He was speaking of the kind of openness of mind that allows elementary scientific innovation to occur, but the metaphor is a serviceable one." Well, I amended that sentence, or I edited it. He was speaking of the kind of openness of mind that allows all scientific innovation to occur. Strike the word elementary and put in the word all. And so the metaphor is very useful. That'll do much better. Thank you, Mr. Hitchens. Well, I think that's the end of the installment for now. I'm on page 62 of the book, and there's no telling if I'll finish it. I think I will, because it's been good so far. But I've enjoyed sitting on this rock. My legs hurt, and I'm going to have to come and download this video in the apartment now and edit it and upload it, and installments later. From Christopher Hitchens, Why Orwell Matters.